throw. One-on-one. Davis has it. Touchdown. Carolina wins. Carolina is the Coastal Division champion. Javonte Williams to the left of Howell. He'll send him out into the flat right side. Howell looking, standing tall, lets it go. Man there. Touchdown! Touchdown, Carolina! The pistol. Jackson behind him. Hands off to Jackson. He tried a jump pass, and it's intercepted. Surratt intercepts it. Holy cow, Carolina's going to win. And off to Javonte Williams again. Pops it to the left. Javonte leaps over a man, crosses the 50, trucks over a defender, spins by another. Goodness gracious, he's down to about the 15, and he did absolutely everything in one carry.
Here's the shotgun snap to Aguilar. Drops back. Pressure coming. Aguilar floats it up. Incomplete. No flags. Head on back up the mountain. Carolina wins it in double overtime. Loftus out of the shotgun. Throws to the end zone. Incomplete. Incomplete. The bell belongs to us. Carolina wins it 47-45 in double overtime.
Bernard fields it at the 26. Heading to the far side. Gio at the 35. Gio, he's at the 50. No, he's not. Yes, he is. Gio is going to take it for a touchdown. Are you kidding me?
What's going on, guys? Welcome into another edition of the Heel Tough Blog Podcast, coming at you on a Tuesday night here. And if we're here middle of the week, if Zack Hubbard is with me, typically this time of the year, it means we're talking a little bit of recruiting. And that's what we're going to be doing here tonight on this edition of the podcast, because the Tar Heels did land 2 commitments here in the last couple of days. They did lose 2 commitments last week. And so it all evens out, and Carolina still sits with 15 commitments overall in the 2026 class. We're going to talk about those commitments, break each one of them down for you, talk about the decommitments, tell you what exactly they mean for Carolina and why those decommitments ended up happening. And also, talk a little bit about a couple of guys who are going to get ready to announce their commitment here later on this week that could potentially boost Carolina's recruiting class even more than we could have imagined here, at least this quickly, off of their official visit. So plenty to talk about here on this edition of the podcast. But yeah, as I mentioned, let's start with the most recent commit that Carolina has in their 2026 class, and that is 2026 offensive tackle Eli Raquel out of Wesleyan High School in Norcross, Georgia. Raquel, a all-state first-team member out of the 3A private classification. He also took home second-team all-county honors this past year, and is a guy that played both sides of the ball as a defensive lineman this past year, finished with 34 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks in 11 games. The previous year, as a sophomore, he received 3A Region 7 honorable mention in his first year as a starter for the team. So a 2-year starter along the offensive line, a guy that has had 2 very different systems that he's run in his 2 years at the high school level. The first year, he was in a system that really stressed pass protection. They threw the ball as much as just about anybody in the state of Georgia. They finished 5th in the state in passing yards. So tells you the system that he was in that year, and then a complete shift in the next season. If you watch his highlight tape, a guy that goes straight to a run blocking system, and is certainly a guy that showed his versatility over the past few years as well, being able to bounce back and forth between those 2 different styles that his high school was playing. So this is an interesting pickup. And Zack, you look at him, 6'5", 265 pounds. So you like the length on him. Biggest concern with him, though, is going to be the weight, and if he's able to get that up once he gets on campus to Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. When you sort of look at the overall profile and sort of how I would classify this in just a few words. This looks to be a long-term projection. Like you mentioned, listed right now at 6'5". Some places you'll see between 265 or even, 250, 255 some places. So a little bit light, and that does show up on the film. You can see it physically. And just based on the classification he's playing at, it's hard to really get a gauge of where this guy is going to fit in at the college level. But we've seen a lot of this at the offensive line position at Carolina and other places where it's one of the positions that is hardest to project in terms of college and beyond, because it's one of the positions that sees one of the biggest sort of variations in growth spurts, the ability to hold weight, things along those lines. So I think there's a little bit of that projection here, in the sense of this is a guy that's likely going to come in, going to spend some time in the weight room, certainly, but just growing up, maturing through the college process to eventually, be a guy down the line that can be a contributor for the team. One thing I do like is his height, listed at 6'5". He can sort of play multiple spots on the line. When you look at his film, he does play primarily right tackle, but he pulls a lot. So you see there could be that, element of playing as a guard. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of run blocking on there, and he is a willing and physical blocker, has a good motor on that. So there's a lot to like here. It's just a matter of, what is he going to turn into down the line that we're really looking at the moment.
Yeah, I think, honestly, when you look at him, I think the first thing that sticks out is the athleticism. It jumps off the table, his ability as a pull blocker, as you said. And I thought it showed up at points in pass protection, too. If you go back to his sophomore film, there were a few times where guys looked like they had him beat off the edge, a little bit of a speed rush to begin, and he's able to recover, get in front of them, and ends up finishing the rep either by knocking a guy to the ground or by just standing his ground well enough and allowing his quarterback to be able to get the ball out. I think the one thing that I like about him here, and it's a little bit different than what we'll talk about with Mason Wilhelm here in just a second, is the mean streak is there for him. He plays with that level of physicality that you like. He may only be 265 pounds, but you're going to feel all 265 pounds of him when he is playing out there. It's the reason why he's able to knock guys down to the ground as easily as he is. And that really started to show up in his junior film. You started seeing more and more pancake blocks, really good leverage guy as well. Even at 6'5", does a good job of getting his body low and is able to really drive defenders down the field. And so I really liked everything that I saw from him in that sense. You're right, though. The big thing for him is going to be just how significant is the learning curve. Because, one, you're going to have to put on a lot of weight. So then how do you play as a guy at that size? Does the athleticism stick? That's something that I think is going to be important because Carolina is going to want to play him. And I know, look, the 24/7 Sports, they list him as an interior offensive lineman. And some of what you said right there about him maybe being a good pull blocker, all that kind of stuff, maybe that is something that they can use to their advantage. But when I looked at him, I thought this is purely an offensive tackle. I think he's too athletic. I think he pass protects well enough to where you could use him as an offensive tackle. And if you're going to have him play offensive guard, especially at 6'5", you're going to have to put a ton of weight on him. I mean, you're talking almost probably, in order to get up to the size that you need him in the middle of that offensive line, you're probably looking at about 50 pounds that you have to add to his frame. That's a lot. And that's going to be something where if you add that type of weight to his frame, how does he translate? How does he end up working as an interior offensive lineman? When you look at some of the guys that you're used to seeing as interior offensive linemen, you're always looking for guys that, even if they play tackle at the high school level, they're just maulers in the run game. Really, that's their strength. You're looking for guys that, maybe don't necessarily have the lateral movement that he has. So to me, I think I'd like to see him stay at offensive tackle. I think the biggest thing is just finding a way to add or to keep that athleticism once you add the weight. And that step up from the 3A-A private league in the state of Georgia, it's going to be a pretty significant step up. So I'll be interested to see, there's also that natural learning curve that we've talked about so much with offensive linemen. It's the reason why you don't see a lot of guys that come in and make immediate impacts. Occasionally, there are guys like Aiden Banfield who come in and make their name heard pretty early, but you'll see that there are going to typically be struggles like there were with Banfield this past year. I think this is a guy that, you're right, is going to need more time. You're looking at him 2-3 years down the line and projecting what he could be. But I really do like the fact that he does have that mean streak to him. That's something that's very, very important. You move on to Mason Wilhelm, and this is a guy along the offensive line that Carolina has, been talking to for a while. This one was the least shocking commitment that I've seen in a while. Honestly, took me or took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take. Because when you go back, you look at his activity on social media, this was a guy that was interacting with every single post that was put up by someone that was targeted by Carolina. So if they would put up any sort of any sort of clip, photos, anything referencing Carolina, he was the guy that was there tweeting out emojis and everything like that. It felt like if Carolina wanted him, he was going to be here. And so Carolina ends up landing him over West Virginia, Pittsburgh, Vanderbilt, and Maryland, all schools that had official visits scheduled with him. So he had still filled out a full official visit schedule, but it seems like it was up to Carolina. Were they going to be willing to take him at that time? They said yes. And so he ends up committing. Another guy, he ended up becoming a 3-star. Raquel still unranked as far as I know. I'll have to check and make sure that they haven't rated him here since yesterday when he ended up committing. But you look at where they ended up ranking a guy like Mason Wilhelm, and, outside of the top 1,000 prospects, the number 92 interior offensive lineman in this class. And you could tell that he is this type of player. He's going to need some time to develop. At 6'4", 290 pounds, plenty of size. That's exactly what you need. This is one of those guys that when you have that size already on him, it makes a little bit of sense why you could see him as an interior offensive lineman. I think right now, if you wanted to have him stick at offensive tackle, this is probably the size that you want him at. His lateral movement, pretty strong, especially for a guy of his size. But there are some areas, Zach, that he does have to clean up. And that's certainly something that we're going to have to see from him, especially if he's going to move on to the interior of the offensive line with some of the physicality and stuff like that, that he doesn't necessarily play with just from watching his film the first time through.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like you mentioned, you do see a lot of sort of the size that is requisite to play at the college level, but there are some things still to work on, mainly just the physicality or, quite frankly, the ferocity to sort of not only stop defenders from progressing past you, but to move them out of the way, as opposed to just being sort of a neutral big body on that offensive line. I think that's still something to improve on in terms of the film, but you sort of see what you're getting with the ranking at this point. Obviously, it's a good player that can play at the college level, at the Division I level, and even at the, Power 4 level. It's just a question of when in that cycle, when can he contribute and sort of what that looks like at this point. But there's definitely the requisite body type listed at 6'4", so sort of right on the cusp of maybe if he gains another inch or two, could play at the right tackle position. Probably projects more so on the interior at this point. We'll sort of see where he ends up at the moment, but this is a guy that has pedigree as well, plays high level football in the state of Ohio. His father was drafted, played in the NFL out of Ohio State. So this fits sort of the profile of a guy that you typically see go develop in a Big Ten program or, in some instances, a MAC program, something like that. I think that sort of fits the flavor that we've seen this staff sort of go after in terms of their guys. It definitely fits what we've seen from teams and, programs such as Bill Belichick's teams in New England. So I like it from that aspect. It'll be another one similar to Raquel that we'll just have to watch in the future. This is not a guy that, we'd expect to come in and play early, but, this is a guy that is really going to define sort of this early tenure for this new staff and this new program as they, do they get time to develop? Will they be there to develop these guys into prospects? We'll have to wait and see, but this will be a marker for them down the line in potential years 3, years 4, when we see these guys sort of finally hit that moment where they've got to show that they're ready to take their game to the next level, whether as a starter or as a backup.
Yeah, I think for him, the thing that you really need to see, as we talked about, is I think ferocity is really a great way to describe it. If he can show that, then I think you've got just about everything else that you need. I think his footwork, pretty good for a high schooler, especially if he's going to remain on the interior of the offensive line. Love his hand placement. I think that's what really allows him to sort of control players on the defensive line and move them out of the way. And I think he shows, pretty nice athleticism out in space. There were a few times where he was the lead blocker playing at that right tackle spot and looked pretty athletic for a guy of his size. Also did a really good job of climbing to the second level, making that first initial block and then finding a way to get to that second level, get a hat on a linebacker or a member of the secondary and create some of those big plays. I think that's going to be important. The violence is going to be important at the, point of attack. That's something he's got to get figured out. And there will be that natural learning curve for him. St. Edward High School, not, the highest classification in the state of Ohio. So again, very similar to what you saw with Raquel, there should be a decent learning curve there for him. But I think this is another guy that just fits what this staff is looking for. They are developmental pieces that can eventually become what they want on the offensive line. And, the thing with him, one thing that's going to be interesting is it's going to be, one that you have to monitor during his senior year, because this is a guy that right now is committed. But I'm going to tell you, as you said, his dad played at Ohio State. You can tell that he is still an Ohio State fan at heart, and why wouldn't you be? This is one of those guys where if the Buckeyes do come calling eventually, if he has a good senior year and the Buckeyes start to make a little bit of noise there towards the end of his senior season, he could end up flipping his commitment. So Carolina's got to be on top of this one if they want to end up committing or keeping him committed. But the good news is that I think you'll probably agree with me on this. Just from looking at the rest of the guys that Carolina has at the position in this class, there are a lot of guys that Carolina is still targeting along the offensive line, even the interior of the offensive line, where now, they already have 3 guys that are committed. You've got Anthony Hall, U-Haul, as they call him, out of the state of Massachusetts that Carolina landed earlier this spring. Zion Smith, another guy that they landed earlier this spring as well, who looks like he's probably going to transition to the interior of that offensive line. And now you've got Mason Wilhelm in there. So it looks like Carolina's built some pretty good depth there, but I know they're still pushing for Desmond Green out of the state of South Carolina. The Tar Heels were hoping that they would be able to get him on campus for an official visit at some point. Khalif Canty was a guy that Carolina was involved in as well. I think that one Carolina's kind of faded out a little bit more so with. But I do think that it's interesting that Carolina is still talking to some other guys there. And I think for sure, even with Raquel committed, I think the offensive tackle spot is certainly an area that Carolina is going to be looking to add someone else at. And they've got multiple targets there, Zach, that I think could end up being, the guy at the end of the day. Trip Skews, who was just on campus this past weekend, 6'7", 300 pounds. Definitely a guy that, Don Callahan of Inside Carolina actually just wrote an article here a little bit ago and said that Carolina at least gave some of the teams that he is going to visit a little bit of hesitance because they clearly showed him enough to at least surge, I would say probably to the top of his recruitment right now or right near the top of his recruitment. But then you've also got, a guy like Tyreek Jimison, out of the state of Georgia that Carolina's been talking to, JB Shabazz, the in-state offensive tackle target. And of course, they do still have a couple other guys, some big name guys that are 4 stars or higher. Thomas Wilder out of the state of Virginia. If Carolina can get him on campus for an official visit, they will definitely be doing that. And then you do have Darius Gray. This was a guy that Carolina supposedly was right back in the mix for, or starting to get in the mix for, according to a couple of reports a few weeks ago. And so if Carolina is involved with guys of that nature, Zach, I think, look, they have filled up certain areas. I think the interior of the offensive line is probably in pretty good shape with the amount of guys that they've landed, but I don't think they're going to turn aside an elite prospect along this offensive line, especially with the number of guys that will be departing after this season is over from the 2025 roster.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we've mentioned in previous shows is the emphasis not only in the transfer portal this offseason, but just in the 2026 recruiting class overall has been the line of scrimmage, offensive and defensive line. Now, like you mentioned, they've gotten a number of guys that project either firmly on the interior or sort of, interchangeable pieces that go potentially likely inside, but potentially outside. Now is the time that they look for that sort of specific tackle type in this class, whoever that may be. But like you mentioned, I don't think they're going to turn anyone away. I think that their number one thing right now is getting talent on this roster. That was the mindset behind the sort of winter and then spring portal windows, is just to increase what they feel is the talent on this roster, increase the physicality on this roster that Tar Heel fans have sort of been clamoring for several seasons now. So I think they're in a good shape, certainly with the offensive line. They've got a number of the guys on the defensive line, but these are both spots on the line of scrimmage, offensive and defensive line, that they're going to continue to evaluate and likely continue to pursue guys to get even more numbers at those two positions.
Yeah, and I think they should, especially with the fact that a lot of the guys in that room are older. They definitely need a little bit more depth there moving forward, and you'd like for that to be with some of the youth that is potentially out there. And when you've got elite prospects that you can get on campus, and Thomas Wilder out of the state of Virginia, I believe he's already been on campus for his official visit. So it'll be interesting to monitor him moving forward as someone that Carolina can potentially land as he now takes his other official visits to Penn State, Maryland, and Virginia Tech. But if you can get him on board, or Darius Gray, the guy that we talked about, who I think would probably project as an interior offensive lineman, I mean, both of those guys are easy takes. I mean, they're elite prospects that would almost, we've talked about, there is a little bit of that learning curve that you do have to navigate, but still, I mean, these are guys that are talented enough to potentially come in and make an influence right away. Now, it's not guaranteed. We saw that with a guy like Zack Rice, who, had all the talent in the world coming out of high school, but it never really translated. But those are the elite type of prospects that we thought we were going to be seeing land at Carolina after the hire of Bill Belichick. And if you can get one or two of those guys, especially on the offensive line, I think that could be important, because I think Carolina is going to be able to do that on the defensive line. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I think the offensive line is really where the questions are at, because right now, when you look at the guys that Carolina has landed, I mean, the top ranked guy out of all of those that they've brought in is Anthony Hall, and he's a guy that's rated in the 800s. Zion Smith, another guy that we think, projects very well. We think he could end up becoming a really good player, and especially because the high school that he plays at, DeMatha Catholic, one of the better, schools in the country, one that plays a national schedule, still not that highly rated. So getting one of those guys in there, I think, would be very important for this staff, and especially for offensive line coach Will Friend, who's trying to prove himself. He's done some good things in his time at the college level. He's developed some really highly rated guys. He's landed some really highly rated guys out of high school. But the last few years, he's sort of started fading as he's gotten towards the back end of his career. He wants to be able to show that he's still got what it takes out there on the recruiting trail. And then, of course, later on when it comes to developing these guys. Let's go to the guys that decommitted here, because there are two pretty significant ones. You had the second highest rated player in the class decommit in Amari Johnson. And that's the one that I think everybody's going to want to talk about. What happened there? Why did he end up decommitting less than 2 months after committing? And, this one was a head scratcher. And I'll give, credit to Inside Carolina. I know someone on one of the message boards, I don't know exactly who it was, but someone sent me this and said that it was from Inside Carolina. So I do want to give them credit for this. But, they said with Amari Johnson, it's a family thing. He's going back close to home because there is some sort of, family. I don't know if it's an issue, if it's a family illness, not sure if he just wants to be closer to his family. Any of those, they're very understandable. And so for him, I think he's now looking, he sort of had a cryptic tweet right before he ended up decommitting, where Carolina was one of 6 emojis that were in there. The Ram emoji was in there, but you see schools like Ole Miss represented by the shark for the land shark defense that they have, or that they call themselves. You've got the Bulldog, I would believe, from Mississippi State. That was a school that was in on him as well. So it looks like he's wanting to stay a little bit closer to home, which is understandable. But Zach, that one certainly was a tough loss, especially after he was a guy that, you brought in. You wanted him specifically to play cornerback for you for a reason. And really, you had sold him on, being a big part of your defensive backfield under Armand Hawkins. And now you've got to go out and try to find another cornerback in this class. That's a spot right now where they don't really have many prospects that they are highly tied to, like some of these other positions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a guy that was a pretty big win for them. It was the highest rated defensive back recruit that they had in the class and was a pretty good two-way player from the state of Mississippi. But when you have a situation like this, where it's a family situation or personal situation, it's one of those things where you just have to, wish the young man good luck with whatever that situation is and sort of, adjust your strategy from there. Like you mentioned, there's not really a ton of names on the board, for cornerback at the moment, because I think this is a position that they mostly had felt had been filled by a guy like him. So it is one where they're going to have to adjust their strategy. They're going to have to look at different guys. We saw, someone get offered here over the weekend in Keegan Chapman out of Alabama, brother of a wide receiver, I believe Keon Chapman, that also officially visited. So that could be the answer. They could look at another guy in this class as well. But then this is also a position that they could look in the future in the portal. I think that with what we've seen this offseason, the portal is probably going to be something that's a big part of North Carolina's recruiting strategy moving forward. And obviously, there's always going to be a preference towards getting guys out of high school and developing them. But there is the reality of you have, a group of guys sort of in the system of college football that are going to be, moving from place to place for one reason or the other. And North Carolina is more likely than not going to be one of those places that guys go to. So I think you're going to have those options for cornerback specifically, but it is a loss, and it's one we'll have to see how they sort of pivot from here in the near future.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, you're 100% right. I feel like a lot of the guys, Carolina's kind of out on them because they thought they were done. You have Justin Lewis already committed to the class, a long corner, 6'2", 165 pounds. That's your guy that's going to play on the outside. And then you've got your slot corner, a guy that was just on campus this weekend helping to recruit this group of uncommitted guys that were on campus in Marcellus Ryan. That's your slot guy, 5'10", 170 pounds. He's going to transition there perfectly. You've also got, a guy in Jaden Jefferson who's an athlete that could potentially play there. But again, that's another guy that's in the slot. So they're going to be probably looking for that other outside corner that they can add to the mix. You mentioned Keegan Shackman is certainly a guy that could be on the radar. Although the thing about him is you're kind of wondering, just how talented he is. He was a guy that Carolina ends up offering, but you look at some of his other offers, and most of them were FCS programs. So it looks like that's one where Carolina might be offering him to try to see if that sways the position of a guy like Keon Chapman. And if it does, then great. We'll take them both on. We'll see whether or not he fits. And if he does, then perfect. If not, he's always a guy that, can transfer down to another level as, and his brother ends up staying there and potentially succeeding. So I think that's certainly an option. And then Carolina also earlier today ended up offering another guy in the class, this one an in-state prospect. And this is where, I think having some of these camps and everything, you'll start to see more of these offers roll in. But Kosi Burns received an offer from Carolina earlier today, 6'2", 185 pounds, outside corner. So this is yet another guy that Carolina might be able to bring in that could help them in that room. And being an in-state prospect, I know that Carolina hasn't done the greatest job with the in-state guys. We've kind of talked about that here on the podcast over the past few months. But I do think that they're starting to show a little bit more affection for the in-state guys. You're starting to see some of these guys pop up on some of these official visit weekends and everything like that. So I do think that this could potentially be an avenue that they go as well, especially when you can get a guy from Grimsley High School, one of the best schools in the state right now, just coming off a 4A state title this past season. And who did they play in that 4A state title? They played the Rolesville Rams, and two of the biggest guys on that team getting ready to announce their commitments coming up later this week. We'll tell you about that here in just 1 second, but did want to quickly talk, Zach, about Darion Kirksey, the 3-star wide receiver out of the state of Mississippi as well, who did decommit from Carolina. So 2 commitments in the state of Mississippi now gone. This one apparently, and this is according to Inside Carolina as well, or at least the message boards, apparently has something to do with academics. Not sure if that's actually 100% true. I would hope for Kirksey's case that is not the reasoning why, and maybe he is just reconsidering. This is a guy that you did have some offers from Ole Miss, Arkansas, other big programs in the SEC that could potentially be where he ends up. But a guy, Zack, that had a lot of promise. I thought had a lot of upside, especially as a deep threat for Carolina, and was really the headliner of this wide receiver class that they have so far in this class. But this is a position a little bit different than the cornerback position because Carolina has a ton of big-time targets that they are going after here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, similar to what you mentioned with Johnson specifically, this is a loss. This was sort of your big play, deep threat guy in the class right now. Not sure, as to the accuracy of it being an academic issue. I know sort of the academic standards for athletics has been something, obviously, as a discussion point in the media here recently, but it's still a factor at a place like North Carolina as it relates to admissions for incoming prospects, things along those lines. So these things do happen. If it is the case, it's not the end of the world for either party, either, this young man or the university. There will be other options, I think, for both parties involved. As it relates to North Carolina, yes, like you mentioned, numerous guys in the 2026 class that they're after, that they have offers for. They already have a guy committed, like you mentioned, and Kamari Miles, who is on campus recruiting. And, regardless of how many guys that they add, they've added a ton to the roster here this offseason through the portal. And it really remains cycle after cycle the position where there is the most available depth that you can go get a guy. Now, guys that are top 3, top 5 at the wide receiver position in the portal, those guys are going to very specific locations, and generally they have a pretty big price tag associated with them. But there's a lot of guys every cycle, every winter, every spring at the wide receiver position in the portal that are, still guys that are able to play at the college level that move around for whatever reason. So I don't foresee this being a position that is a huge concern. We're regardless of which direction they go, whether it be a number of guys in this high school class, a guy, in the portal, next portal cycle, next winter, next spring, or even on the field this season. I think this is a position where North Carolina, we felt that they're pretty decently situated for the immediate future. They look like they're in a pretty good spot for, the far future as well. So though this is a loss in terms of a decommitment, it is a loss that, North Carolina can pivot a little bit easier than they would from other positions where losses would be a bit more drastic.
Yeah, I mean, this is a position that Carolina's recruited so well at over the years that it's not shocking that they're in a good spot here. Incredibly young in that wide receiver room. I mean, right now you look on the roster and they have two upperclassmen that I can see. You've got Kobe Paysor and Chris Culliver. Everybody else is an underclassman, which means that they're going to be around, you would think, for, a decent period of time. I wouldn't imagine. I mean, maybe a guy like Jordan Shipp jumps and breaks out this year, and all of a sudden we're talking about him next year leaving the program. But again, he would still have another year of eligibility to go. So it's such a young room that I think you probably feel pretty good. And that's a spot where Carolina went out and got guys in the transfer portal at the wide receiver position. They were able to add those guys pretty easily there, and some talented guys as well. So I think they're going to be just fine. In terms of looking for your deep threat in this class, I mean, there's plenty of options that you can get. There's plenty of guys that fit that outside receiver spot that Carolina, is currently in the running for. The guy that everybody would want is Calvin Russell, a guy who is a borderline 5-star prospect out of the state of Florida, down there in the Miami area. Look, Carolina landed in his top 8. I don't think that's going to end up happening. I think that's a little bit of a pipe dream. But, I mean, then you get to some of the other guys that Carolina is tied to. Chase Campbell out of the state of Texas. You may think to yourself, well, how serious of a contender is Carolina to actually land him? Seems like it's pretty legitimate. It seems like they actually might have a shot here. They are going to host him this upcoming weekend. So we'll see. I mean, he's taken a lot of official visits, so there's a lot of different areas or different ways that he could go. The good news is that out of the state of Texas, you don't have any of the heavy players that are involved with him. It's Texas Tech and Baylor. It's not Texas. It's not SMU, who's really done a good job recruiting-wise out of that state, or Texas A&M. So I think that certainly gives Carolina a shot there. Keon Chapman, who we just talked about, who was on campus, you do wonder, does he get sort of influenced by the offer of his brother, especially if his brother is saying, look, that's my chance. I want you there with me. That could certainly be something that pulls him there. Although we've seen it before where guys have committed to other schools, a la Noah Rogers and his brother. He ends up going to Ohio State. Cyrus ends up coming to Carolina as a walk-on. So you never really know, but that could weigh into the decision there. Jaden Petit, another guy who will end up visiting Carolina out of the state of Florida. That'll come later on in the month. June 13th will be the weekend that he's on campus. And then, of course, there's another big name that really everybody's going to be talking about whenever he does eventually come to campus at Carolina. He's going to be on campus June 20th. So Carolina will get the last shout in his recruitment, and that's Devin Fitzgerald, the son of Larry Fitzgerald. He's 6'2", 195 pounds, so he fits that outside receiver spot that they're looking for. Really, all of the guys that I just mentioned all fit that definition. You got everybody's at least 6'2" or bigger, and I think that certainly is what Carolina is hoping to add in this class. So I expect they will find someone as well. It's just a matter of how soon will they end up finding somebody, I think is going to be the case. Now let's talk about the guys that could be committing to Carolina later on this week, and that is the Griffin-Haynes brothers. Xavier Griffin-Haynes, who, of course, was committed to Carolina at one time under Mac Brown, and his brother Jaden Griffin-Haynes. Both guys were on campus this past weekend, and it feels like Carolina is the team to beat because of the timing of their announcement, the fact that it was announced today by the Rollsville Rams football Twitter account. I don't think that's a coincidence. And the other thing is that you look at the article that was written by Don Callahan of Inside Carolina, who, does a tremendous job of covering everything recruiting when it comes to, these big recruiting weekends and everything like that. He wrote an article yesterday about Xavier Griffin-Haynes and talked about how Carolina has gone from being eliminated in his race to being the number one team in his race and the team that is controlling everything. And so now with this, you kind of put the pieces together and it looks like Carolina might be able to land these guys. Zach, how big would it be? Especially, Jaden, I think, provides a lot of upside at the linebacker spot. Had 107 tackles last year, 6 sacks, very impactful linebacker that I think is probably going to be a lot better than people realize. But Xavier Griffin-Haynes, to get him back on board, land an in-state edge rusher, and more importantly, just land an edge rusher in this class and a guy that's a 4-star prospect, how big would that be for the Tar Heels?
Yeah, I mean, both commitments I feel would be absolutely big. I don't think there's really any question about it from all the angles that you mentioned. Getting 2 members of the front 7, but specifically getting a guy in that defensive line, getting an edge rusher specifically, that's huge. Getting a guy in Xavier that is in the top 500 in that 4 to 5-star range that we've sort of been looking for them to get sort of one of these guys here to sort of build that momentum. That would be huge. And then just the in-state aspect of getting these guys, from the state of North Carolina to stay within North Carolina. That's something with this current program that's been somewhat of a question. They've had mixed results, I'd say, thus far in the 2026 class. So really getting some of that momentum back, I think, will be huge with these 2 guys. And I think just sort of the timeline of how these recruitments have gone from being committed to being uncommitted to then it looking like North Carolina is completely out, then to sort of, roar back into this race pretty resoundingly. I think it shows a lot of resolve by this staff recruiting. And I think it's really going to be, sort of a pelt on the wall, so to speak, to have this really big win that they can tout heading into these other weekends. I mean, this is just the first official visit weekend. They've got others coming up. So being able to have that sort of big win to carry into the other weekends, I think that's going to be absolutely huge here in the month of June and then into early July when we see some of these guys start to lock in their decisions.
Yeah, I think, this would really make a statement, I think, to, any of us, and I'm included in this, anybody that's questioning the in-state recruiting, I think it would be a pretty big statement that, hey, we are recruiting the best in this state. It just took a little bit of time. And with Xavier in specific, to go from out of the race for him, eliminated, no longer, considering them, never were out of the race for Jaden. So there was always a chance that Jaden could end up coming here. But the biggest prize out of the 2 of them, and the one that most importantly is at a position of need for you in this class, I think Carolina really wanted to make a statement to him. And the fact that they were able to convince him to drop the official visit that he had to Clemson, and then not only do that, but you would think, okay, he ends up dropping that visit. He comes to Carolina. He's seen, it seems like he really enjoyed himself there. Really good environment for him. And even if Carolina was the leader, I thought for sure he was going to take every one of his other official visits that he had scheduled, because this was a team that you had eliminated from the race for you. And now it looks like there's a good chance that this is going to actually end up with him committing and go from, in less than 3 weeks, Carolina being eliminated completely from contention to being the pick is, I mean, it's an unbelievable job by Bill Belichick and his staff. And I think shows just how impactful this staff really is starting to become. It took it a little bit of time. We didn't see it necessarily in the transfer portal this time around. There were some big names that you do wonder, does Carolina end up landing them if Mac Brown is here? But part of that was because there were such big holes in this roster because of the guys that had ended up leaving through the transfer portal. This really is the statement that you want to make. It's the 2026 class. And to this point, you only have one 4-star commit. If you could get Griffin Haynes, both brothers on board. I mean, yeah, Jaden, I think, is a guy that's probably going to end up staying a 3-star. You never really know. He could end up making that leap. But we know for sure that Xavier is going to be a 4-star guy. And so that is huge. That's a big feather in the cap of Bill Belichick. And I think that's something that hopefully shows moving forward that, hey, when we actually get a look at what this looks like on the field, and if it's successful, this is really only the start of the success that we could see in this recruiting class for Carolina. So it'll be interesting to monitor that. We'll have you covered over on the website, HeelToughBlog.com. Going to have an article going up here tonight after I get off of this edition of the podcast that will be detailing what's going to happen on Friday. As of right now, there's no time, there's no location, there's no streaming service information, none of that stuff. But if we do get that article, we'll put it out tonight, and then we'll also update it and send it out if there are updates for you guys, because this one truly is one of the biggest commitments in this class for the Tar Heels. So any information that we have about that, we'll put that up on the website for you. We'll have an article that's going up tomorrow for you guys. We like to do that typically in the middle of the week after you have the official visitors come through. Who do we feel best about? I'm going to tell you right now, a little bit of a hint. The Griffin Haynes boys are at the top of the group that we feel the best about, but it's all 13 of the other guys that remain uncommitted after you had Wilhelm, who was on campus, commit, and Raquel commit. So make sure you check out that article tomorrow. That's always a fun one that I like to do. And again, that's just based off of feeling, just based off of what we see on the recruiting websites, some of the feedback that you get from Don Callahan with some of the articles that he's writing. And then it's basically just me going off of how do I feel in that moment about this guy as compared to the rest of the guys that were on campus and Carolina's chances to actually end up landing him. So I've had fun writing those articles. Really appreciate you guys for checking that out. And then, of course, we'll have an article previewing the next weekend coming up. I don't think it's going to be nearly as packed. I'm still trying to get together the full list of the guys that are going to be on campus. But still, Carolina in the middle of this important month for the 2026 class, and they've got a bunch of guys that'll be on campus, and we're going to have you covered the entire time. Also, go back, read about what we talked about at the start of this podcast, the 2 commitments that Carolina landed. There is an article up there about Mason Wilhelm that you can check out. Same thing on Eli Raquel if you want a little more information about both of those guys that we weren't able to necessarily give you here on this edition of the podcast. Meanwhile, on the basketball side of things, guys, it's still crazy. Things aren't 100% done just yet. We feel pretty confident that Carolina is not going to go after anybody else at this time, but you never really know. Guys can crop up out of nowhere. Carolina went international for Luka Bogovac on the wing, so make sure you go back and check out that article that is up there that I wrote the other day after his commitment. And, of course, any other news that comes out around Carolina basketball, me and Josh will have you covered in the offseason as we go throughout, what is a very crucial stretch here for Hubert Davis as he looks to build a roster that hopefully can get him back to the point that he needs to get to at Carolina, which is a successful winning coach that makes the NCAA tournament on a consistent basis. So anything that comes out around the basketball program, we will have you covered on that front. But that wraps it up for this edition of the podcast here tonight. Want to thank Zach for hosting with me. Want to thank you guys for watching and listening. And as always, go Tar Heels.